The IKEA Business Network is now open for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Join for free today to get access to interior design services to help you make the most of your workspace, employee well-being benefits to help you and your people grow, and amazing discounts on travel, insurance, and IKEA purchases, deliveries, and more. Take your small business to the next level when you sign up for the IKEA Business Network for free today by searching IKEA Business Network.
Selling a little or a lot? Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your own online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage? Shopify's there to help you grow. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout. 36% better on average compared to the other leading commerce platforms. Because businesses that grow, grow with Shopify. Get a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/promo. Shopify.com/promo.
Hello and welcome to The Price of Music, the show that looks at the money behind the music industry with me, Steve Lemack, and Music Ally's Head of Insight, Stuart Dredge. First, a very quick correction. When I said last week that our daughter had discovered Conan Gray on Avatar World, she was at pains to point out to me on hearing last week's show that it was in fact on Toka Life, which apparently is an entirely different virtual world. So we can only apologise to any of our musician followers who have spent the past week trying to find a way of creating a new revenue stream in the wrong reality. How many of these virtual worlds are there? Actually, don't answer that, Stuart. We'll be here all day. We've got other matters to address. How have you been anyway since last week? Are you well?
I'm good. I'm just overheated now. I've got that traditional British thing of now that's too much summer. Having 2 weeks ago been saying when summer arriving. Now I'm like, can we please?
Yeah, don't knock it. Did you get a chance to cast your eye over the Mercury Music Prize nominations, which came out last Thursday? Did you have a look at the list?
Do you know, one of the most exciting things that's been interesting is I get the press release, so I get to go and tell people who's nominated.
Right.
But yeah.
And what did they say in the press release, apart from telling everyone what an amazing award it is? Because I don't know what you make, what your take on the Mercury is at this point.
I mean, I've been a few times, and I always like it because you get to see them all perform, which is one of the things we can talk about because that's not going to happen this year. But just seeing all these things in juxtaposition. I remember one year seeing, I think it was Sons of Kemet. One year I saw them and it was like, they came on and everyone's like, oh, it's a jazz album. Let's have a good old chat at our tables. And by the end, they got a standing ovation because they were so good. And that was really interesting. When you see something comes along and everyone's like, right, jazz album, this is, and that year was great. And then the next year, the jazz album won. So yeah, I know it's also, as I get older, some of these albums I haven't heard of. And it's a good yearly reminder of like, take a listen to these because someone has decided they're artistically worthy. So it's quite a good nudge. How about you, though? What do you think?
I mean, as anyone who knows me will tell you, I have long been a bit of a Mercury skeptic, and not necessarily due to the records that are chosen for the shortlist. And I do see the inferred, purpose of it, which is, you say, is to highlight records, some of which might have gone under the radar of music fans, and it has helped some artists over the years, and at least it's a chance to get some more music on the telly as well, because there isn't much music left on TV. But the reason I find it uncomfortable is down to, well, it's probably two things, actually. I mean, one, it does, I'm afraid to say, from my point of view, it has an achingly high opinion of itself, does the Mercury Prize. And then there's the money involved, which, I mean, it's changed a little over the years now. I mean, it's much less expensive than it used to be. But you have to enter, it's £200 plus VAT just to enter. So they're getting 200 times, I don't know, around 250 entries, which actually I thought was quite low. I thought more people would enter than that. But I don't know, when I was involved in a label, and obviously this has changed, but when I was involved with Deceptive Records, and Elastica's album was nominated, after the nomination, after you've paid to enter, then they'd ask you for all sorts of things, including you had to give them quite a hefty contribution towards their marketing costs. I think you also had to give them a track royalty free for a compilation CD, and then you've got to buy your own tickets to the event as well. So you could be down by about a grand back then just for buying a table. But things have changed, haven't they? As I say, you still have to pay to enter. But now, because I looked this up, but according to the official Mercury website, there are no additional fees or requests made for any other contributions or payments. And you won't have to buy tickets for a ceremony this year because there is no ceremony, which came as a surprise, didn't it? Did it not?
Yeah, well, it says so they're going to have BBC Music as a partner. They're going to provide exclusive TV and radio coverage, online and social media report. And then this year, other extensive promotional activity replaced the usual live performance event, but they're going to announce that close to the time. So no one really knows what's going to happen, other than it's not a great big free dinner for the industry while listening to music.
Yeah, you wonder it's got to be down to budget, hasn't it? I think. There's two reasons why you would cancel the live event. One is that you couldn't guarantee the commitment of all the artists to turn up and play live, or you can't afford it, or they can't afford it, depending on who's been asked to put the money up for getting the band together and transporting them there, and bringing along their sound crew and whatever else they
Which
need.
year was it? Last year? When did this is going to sound terrible. When did the Queen die? Was it 2 years ago? Oh yeah, it's all gone so fast.
Yeah,
but that was the day they had everyone there, and they had to literally give it serving the bread rolls and had to send everyone home. I think.
Yes.
The Queen.
Oh,
so maybe they decide then the downside of a live ceremony is you can because was it the PJ Harvey one when they had to call it off because that was 9/11. So they've had a couple of times and they've had to abandon the ceremony on the day of. Maybe they've decided that online is better.
Yeah, I just wonder if there's no focus for it though. Whether that will affect the impact that the award has, and particularly because we don't know. I don't think they've even said how or where they're going to announce the winner. They'll be announced in September, but we don't know
with
where.
A TikTok dance routine. That's my. But so if you're a skeptic, is there any point in me asking you who do you think should win? Who do you think's going to win, or do you kind of avoid all that kind of speculation? Because that's part of the fun of it. I think for me has always been like. And actually, it's not me. It's do you know Paul from Record of the Day?
Yeah,
he goes round. He used to go around at a ceremony with a piece of paper and say, "Right, who's going to win, and who would you like to win?"
Right.
And you just get everyone to fill it in and see who was right. And it was that dual thing of who you think will win.
Yeah, I don't know. I looked up the odds. Charlie XCX is currently favourite. What was interesting was two of the guitar records in the list of betting odds that I had a look at earlier on. The English Teacher album, Last Dinner Party, I think, was second favourite. English Teacher's album, This Could Be Texas, was third favourite. And I like that English Teacher album a lot. You're slightly worried that once you've had your Mercury moment, will you ever have it again? So it's quite. They're both debut albums, aren't they? And where would they go next? But there are some interesting records on that list. I think as an outsider, I might have a pound on that CMAT record because the CMAT album is a good. It's not really my kind of thing, but it's a big hit at 24 Railway Cuttings. I can tell you with the rest of the family, and that's how I've heard it a lot. And I think CMAT is a really interesting character as well. But it's over the years I've found it's very hard trying to second guess the judges. So apart from 1 year where I predicted Speech to Bell would win. And then forgot to have a bet on it.
And it's one of those things, isn't it, where sometimes the obviously the clear favourite doesn't win, and it's like, well, everyone reacted against the hype, and then every so often they give it to the clear favourite. I think just to keep everyone guessing. But the thing it nudged me to listen to was Barry Can't Swim this year, one of the other nominees, because about 6 people have told me in recent months you would love Barry Can't Swim, specifically you. We know what you like, and you would love them. And I just hadn't got around to listen to it. I listened to it last night. And I do like it. So all those people were right, but it took the Mercury nomination to remind me. So,
that is the thing. I do think, as I say, despite everything else, I think the idea of the prize is good. To have a prize which isn't entirely based around sales, and whoever wins gets the statutory prize of £25,000. Which I guess in this day and age, not to be sniffed at. But
I might have a quid on Night Archives. I think that's my long shot bet.
Is it?
Because I love that album. It's like just the nostalgic for old school drum and bass in me loves it, but it also feels somehow brand new. So yeah, that's my kind of sentimental. I'd like this to win.
Yeah. Well,
One.
congratulations anyway to all the nominees. As I say, the winner will be announced at some point in September. Right, news. Hang on tight, everyone. We're going in with Spotify and Universal Music Group and their financial revelations and some interesting knock-on effects. Where would you like to start? Would you like to start with Spotify, which was a story which broke while we were recording last week's news episode, but anything else to come out of the Spotify figures?
Yeah, so we should start with the bigger company first, which is one of the things we're going to talk about. But yeah, so Spotify posted its financial results last week. The big news there was it was profitable, which is counter what people think. Its users grew, but it missed its predicted target for users. So it thought it was going to have about 631 million users, and it only had 626 million, which may sound like we're splitting hairs, but when you make a prediction, analysts go quite serious about that.
Right.
So that was that, and that went okay. And Spotify's share price has been okay. And then a couple of days later, Universal Music Group announced its financials, and the interesting thing here was when you read them, they sound good. So UMG, biggest major label, its revenues were up 8.7% year on year. Publishing was up 10.1%. Recording music up 5.8%. Made more money from subscription streaming services, lots of good stuff. And then its share price tanked by sort of 20% in the day afterwards.
Yeah, so why is that? Sorry to interrupt, because I read it in the same way as you. I looked at the figures and everything looked like it had gone up. So I was thinking, well, the champagne will be out in the boardroom this afternoon, and then, as you say, and then the shares went belly up.
Yeah. So what it is about is basically Universal said its revenues from subscriptions and streaming were up 4.1% year on year, I think it was. And the analysts who work for the big investment banks, they've been expecting about 10% growth there. So essentially, subscription streaming is growing. Streaming revenues are growing slower than analysts expected, even though they're still growing. There's actually Barclays analysts wrote this note saying investors bought UMG mostly for low double-digit growth in paid streaming, so 10% growth year on year. And if paid streaming growth stays lower, we see UMG multiples falling, people selling their shares. So the story is streaming, and particularly paid streaming, isn't growing as fast as people think. And a lot of this goes back to this report last year from Goldman Sachs, another one of the big investment banks. And they predicted that global paid streaming revenues would grow 12.9% this year. So there was this big report. It said streaming is going to go gangbusters. And that was a report that the music industry gets circulated widely. And it's what music companies pass to investors saying, look how much we're going to grow. Goldman Sachs says it's going to be 12.9%. So when you come out and give results saying growth is actually half that, that's when the share price. So it's kind of it's inflated expectations. And so the question is kind of, were those too high to start with, or is something happening disappointing? Which kind of brings me on to another bit of Universal, where in their financial call, they made this comment, which is quite interesting. They were like, a slowdown in subscriber growth at certain platforms. This is a quote from their kind of chief financial officer. While Spotify, YouTube, and many regional and local platforms will continue to exhibit healthy growth in subscribers, other large partners who have been less successful in driving global adoption have seen a slowdown. So essentially, Universal called out, well, Spotify's doing well, YouTube's doing well, regional streaming services doing well, but other large partners, which kind of is Apple and Amazon, really, if you think about it.
Right.
So there's something happening here, which is that everything is growing, but there's disappointing, not the growth that was being expected by the industry, but also by the analysts who recommend whether investors should buy and sell shares. And so hence. But the other thing we should talk about is, this happened a little bit before, but yes, Spotify has now overtaken Universal Music Group in its market capitalization, so the value of the company. So at the time of talking, and something could happen overnight, anything could happen and they could completely reverse. But Spotify is worth about $65 million and Universal Music is worth about $42 million because it's gone down. Right. And Spotify's been growing slowly. So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter that Universal is bigger or smaller than Spotify in a sense. They're both still huge companies. Universal's still the biggest record label. but it is kind of an interesting, where is the economic power and how is that changing, and what is Universal going to do about that in
Yeah,
future?
that's what I was going to say. It's the dynamic when you get to negotiations over who is the biggest. I mean, they both need each other, but as you
Yeah.
say, where is the power? Where and who's got the best hand to play when they're sitting around the table? I guess. The other thing I suppose we should mention is that both of these companies, while recording figures which appear to, both of them have gone up, but they have both of them let staff go, haven't they, recently over the
They
past
have, and
few months?
yeah, and major labels have let stuff go. Spotify have. It's one of those things where, in what theoretically is a boom time for the industry, because everything is going up, people are being laid off, and everyone is looking ahead and going, right, maybe we're not going to grow as fast as we thought.
Mm.
I mean, the other thing that happened was Spotify did their investor call after we recorded last week, and this might play into this actually, because Daniel Ek, the CEO, was talking, and he was talking about plans for a more expensive tier of Spotify.
Oh, really?
So yeah, he was saying the plan here is to offer a much better version of Spotify, something that could be something like $5 above the current premium tier. So if you pay for a subscription for like 11, I think it's 11.99 now, like £5 more. And he called it a deluxe version of Spotify with all the benefits, but a lot more control, higher quality across the board. So higher quality audio, better quality sound, and some other things he's not ready to talk about just yet. But there have been rumors of cleverer playlist stuff, tools that will allow people to kind of speed up and mash up and edit songs, and maybe superfan stuff. If you're a super fan of an artist, some stuff for you that's exclusive. So that's interesting, because if Spotify has a tier that costs £5 more a month, and if there are a lot of people, like he said, that want that, then that would drive more money, in turn more payouts to Universal Music Group and so on. And so that might help Universal Music Group's share price go back up, because it will give him more money from Spotify. So kind of all these things are interconnected. Like this idea of how do we get more money from paid streaming is going to be a really, really hot topic this year, I think. And Universal's been quite open about the fact he's got plenty of ideas of how streaming services can make money and pay more money. So I think it's going to be amping up the pressure, especially on the ones that it said were disappointing. But even from Spotify's side, they're saying, yeah, we think there's people who want to pay more, and so we're figuring out what we can give them, and that if that works, would be good. But it's not quite ready.
That's a difficult car journey, isn't it, for Daniel Ek in the front seat when UMG are offering advice, the backseat drivers of how streaming should improve itself. That's an interesting.
That's always been the push and pull, I think. Like the music industry, like we know how this should work, and there have been times in Spotify's history where it said, "I think we know how this should work." Like there was a famous one quite near the beginning when labels said, "Your free service is too good. People aren't going to pay." And Spotify said the reason people will pay is by us having a good free service. Mm-hmm. And so there was a time when the labels were kind of forcing Spotify to restrict its free tier and kind of, you need to clamp down on this to make them pay. And eventually, actually, in that case, Spotify was proved right in a way, because it said, no, the less restrictions there are, the more they fall in love with it, the more they're likely to pay. But I think we may, not just Spotify, I think with all streamers, we may about to see a period of maybe haggling. And like you say, it's major labels saying, we think we've got some ideas on what you need to do. We need to put the price up. We want you to do super fan stuff, higher quality. And the streaming service will decide whether they think that's right, how they implement it. So yeah, it's going to be, but they're all in service of a good thing, which is people pay more for music. And I think we probably both agree that paying for music is worth doing, and paying a bit more than we do for streaming is good. So
yeah, it depends what you want from your streaming service, doesn't it? Because if I was to pay, if I was asked to pay £5 more, there are bits of some of those suggestions, like being able to edit and mash up, which I'm not really going to use a lot. A better quality, that would be great. Although I would be hoping that you would be improving your quality anyway without forcing me to pay an extra £5 for it. So what I mean, our relationship's very fragile. I think our patience is very fragile.
Yeah, the superfan stuff is all I'm quite interested in. Like one thing that's been tried before but didn't quite take off then was, what if you paid a bit more and some of that money went straight to the artists who you like most? So in your case, I'm trying to think of a good example really. I always say Fat Dog,
Well,
but think of it. Who's a new band who you love? Like, if you paid £5 more and you knew that, like, I don't know, a quid of that was going to Fat Dog, a quid was going to Idols. Like, if there was some, I pay more, but it gets to the people I love directly. Like, I'd be fascinated in that, but I don't know how that works. I don't know if the bands have to do something to get that money. But I'm really interested if that's the road they go down of like pay more, but have a little bit more of your cash going to the stuff that maybe you listen to and love. But that's my speculation.
Also, how do you calculate that? Because if you go off the top 5 of a family account, that means your money will be going directly to Disney.
Paw Patrol is going to be suddenly a massively lucrative franchise. Yeah.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your site will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Moving on from the Universal story, I think this it sort of attaches itself quite nicely. Is this Apollo Global Management have invested £700 million in Sony Music Group? So what's the deal here?
Yeah, so Apollo are a really big investment firm. And they've been involved in music before. So they invested in a company called Harborview Equity Partners a few years ago, which buys catalogue. And, we were talking recently about Hypnosis Songs Fund and people trying to buy that. And Apollo were backing one of the companies, Concord, who were trying to buy that, but didn't succeed. So they're big money and interested in music. And they've invested, provided a $700 million capital solution to Sony Music Group for investments in the music industry. And it was like a really sparing 2-paragraph press release. And the second paragraph was a quote, basically repeating that and not giving any more details. But if you're joining the dots, Sony's been in the news a lot, reportedly paying $1 billion for Queen's music catalogues recently. And there was a story a couple of weeks ago from Music Business Worldwide saying Apollo is the financial partner for that. So if you join those dots, this investment is probably going to help Sony Music buy Queen's catalogues, which it's done before. So in 2021, it paid about $550 million for Bruce Springsteen's catalogues, and it had an investment firm called Eldridge was its partner there. So this idea of like the major label wants to spend a lot of money on a catalogue, but it needs some finance for that. So it seems to be that kind of deal.
So it's going in through the back door into ownership of catalogue. Essentially.
Yeah, and it's so in a sense, it's going to go into Brian May's pocket, and he can fund his Badger campaigns, which is not me taking the piss. Like I think he's a marvelous man doing all that work he does. But yeah, so this is about helping Sony buy, presumably Queen's catalogs, and it's kind of this. Warner Music has done this before. Universal Music has worked with like this idea of like the biggest companies in the music industry wanting to make really big deals. They need big money of the kind that even they don't have necessarily swashing about in their coffers. So that's where they look towards these private equity companies. And then they put the money up. And then the idea then is the major label can manage that catalog, can make it more valuable, can find new ways to make money from it. So, good news for Queen, probably. Good news for Sony. And it's I think we're going to see a few more of these deals when the biggest catalogs come available. So,
Next, the fallout from Canada's new 5% levy on global streaming services continues. But just maybe recap this one, just in case any of our listeners missed this when we first covered it.
We're becoming the go-to podcast for Canadian music industry policy initiatives, aren't we? Do you think that's what's going to get us 1,000 more listeners?
That's where the big bucks are. Any bucks.
Yeah. Well, look, to recap, the Canadian government has got this new law. It's going to take a 5% cut of the Canadian revenues of global streaming services. So that includes Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, but it also includes Netflix video streaming services. So if you're a big global streaming service doing video or music, you will now have to pay 5% of the money you make in Canada to a fund, which is going to support like local music and artists and culture. So the two things going on here, streaming services are very cross about this. They say they already support Canadian artists. They put them on their playlist. They help them find global audiences. So they don't need to be suddenly made to pay more money to do that. And Spotify, Amazon and Apple are already challenging this new levy. They're filing a legal challenge against it. But yeah, so the boss of Music Canada, which is like the music industry body in Canada, he's been a critic of it before. And he came up with quite a punchy blog post this week, which was saying almost half of that money, that 5%, will be used to prop up traditional radio. 40% of it goes to funding the radio industry. So there's kind of these mixed messages where the Canadian government is saying, we want global streaming services to pay, and this will help support our local artists and culture. And you've got the streaming service saying, no, you're just trying to prop up radio because we're getting radio's listeners away. So you're propping up a kind of an industry that's in the past. And that's the argument. So it's weird because I was thinking about this. I was trying to think, what's going on. And like Canada's always quite famous. It has rules for how much broadcasters and filmmakers support local culture. Like it's always been like, we're next to the US, we're next to Hollywood. So we need to have quite some regulations around making sure we support local content. And there's an argument, if you're going to make radio and TV do that, you should probably make streaming services do it as well. Like it should be the same rules. But in this blog post, the Music Canada boss, is a guy called Patrick Rogers, he said that streaming services are being asked to pay around 10 times what radio broadcasters pay. So he's saying it's the amount that's unfair and where it's going to. So it's turned into this quite big row about, one side, you need to support local culture and we'll create a fund. On the other side, no, we don't. We do it already and you're just propping up radio. So it's kind of becoming quite a heated battle and there's going to be a legal challenge and kind of people throwing things at each other verbally.
I mean, without knowing how Canadian radio is doing, it's hard to comment. But if you overlaid what's happening there in this country, it'd be very hard to say, oh, you're just propping up radio when radio is doing really well in the UK at the moment. And I'm not quite sure. I don't follow necessarily this train of thought that says streaming is undermining and ruining radio and you're just propping radio up when radio seems to be doing all right. I don't know what it's like in Canada.
This is where I'll defer to you. Like, how is commercial radio doing here? Because I feel like we're lucky with the BBC in a sense, which is kind of insulated in some ways. But how is commercial radio doing here? Is that suffering for streaming, do you think?
No. Not at all. Global are having a tremendous time at the moment. Commercial radio, I don't think, has ever been as successful as it is now because
it's interesting, isn't it?
Partly because of the spread now and the new stations that have come through. Greatest Hits Radio is doing really well, and obviously that's in some cases that's listeners that have just moved from the BBC to commercial radio. In this case, I think I think it's fair to say, I don't think anyone's going to fire me from my one show on the BBC for saying that some listeners followed Ken Bruce into the commercial sector. So some of it is just listeners moving around from station to station. But in general, with all because it's a tremendous fabric of different musical genres that are represented by commercial radio, but also having taken some of their big name brands like Hearts and things and taking it national, we now have a lot of radio which it seems to be radio's doing fine, and commercial radio certainly is doing all right, I think.
And we don't really have that culture of quotas for local stuff, do we? Or I mean, again, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like we don't have that sort of thing where TV companies don't. Well, I suppose Channel 4 has some stuff, doesn't it? But that's more about independent broadcasting, I think. But,
I think there's no patriotic flag waving though. That's wherever you go.
No, but it is interesting because I think we've seen some stuff happening in France like this, where they've got a body called the National Centre de la Musique, and the streaming services are kicking off there about being asked to contribute to that. And again, the argument there is, well, this will support local culture, local music. So there is this thing about global big streaming services. Who decides how they support local culture? Should they be allowed to do that themselves, or does someone need to create a fund and oversee it externally and they just put money into it. And the one thing that's happened so far is when that's been mooted in Canada and France, the streaming services have been very, very, very punchy about, we don't like this. This is going to make us have to invest less in the country. We have to put our prices up. They're quite aggressively fighting this idea. And I wonder if one reason for that is that they worry it might catch on. And in every country, they'll be contributing money. And I sort of see both sides, because I think if you're working for Spotify Canada, you are making playlists and you're putting Canadian acts. And, someone there is saying, I want to help Canadian artists get an audience. So they are doing stuff. So it's quite a nuanced thing. There's no kind of obvious baddie and goodie here, but it is turning into quite a big argument. And I think the reason we're talking about it and the reason I write about it is a lot of countries are looking at this and saying, do we need something like this? Do we need a fund? Do we need some way of making sure that if you're a big service, you're supporting our local art?
Finally, for this episode, here's our and finally story. And finally, 14 teams in the NBA are being sued over their use of music in social media posts.
This is a recurring story for us, isn't it? We were talking about the Beastie Boys. Was it last week we were talking about Beastie Boys and that restaurant chain? Like, someone who's a business or a brand uses commercial music in their social posts and they get sued by the music industry. And so this case, 14 basketball teams, which I had to look this up. It's nearly half the NBA. It's 30 teams in the league, so that's nearly half the teams. And they're being sued by music publishers, so Cobalt, Artlist Publishing Group, Notting Hill Music. So it's a publishing lawsuit rather than a label lawsuit. Mm-hmm. But they're accused of using music in their videos on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever Twitter is now. And it is that the same odd thing I've talked about before is if you're a regular person, you can just search for a song in the catalog and put it in your video. If you're a business, you can't. You have to go and get a license. And so far, these cases tend to go the way of the music industry if they go to court, because the rules are quite clear. Like those companies, TikTok, Instagram, they have licensing deals, but they don't cover commercial use by brands.
So I find this really strange, though, that because you are left with, what are the two reasons why this might have happened? One, it's somebody who's not aware that you need a license, or it's just the terrific arrogance of somebody saying, "I don't care that you need a license." But I mean, sure, and both of those are bad. Do you know what I mean? The arrogant, we're just going to use your music, that's quite bad. But also, surely in this day and age, doesn't everyone kind of vaguely know that you can't just use somebody's music without asking maybe their permission first?
Well, there've been lawsuits, there've been settlements. I know. See, why I don't understand all the elements of the sports licensing landscape in the US. There may be some rights that the NBA does have for music, for example, play music in court. So there may be someone doing it thinking they're covered and not. But I mean, it must be tempting. Like if you are the social media person for, say, I don't know, Man City, and you have a video clip of Erling Haaland lifting a trophy, the temptation to slap "Simply the Best" by Tina Turner on top of it and put it out on TikTok. But your part of your job would be to know that you can't do that unless you've gone and licensed "Simply the Best." So yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you look at it and say this will probably be settled, but it just keeps happening. And at some point, I don't know. At some point, either the message gets through, or maybe what's needed is some easy way to license music. Maybe if people want to use, there's obviously a demand here. Like brands and businesses want to use popular songs in their social posts, and maybe especially with sports, you're probably trying to put something out quite quickly, aren't you? Like you've got a clip from a game and you want to have and so licensing it the traditional way might be too slow and difficult, in which case there's an opportunity there for the music industry to go, right, we're going to launch this. Here's how you do this. Here's how you can put a song in your clip and we get paid and no one gets sued. So maybe every time this happens, it will make that more likely, as well as making it less likely people do this. But
maybe you need, I don't know, Taylor Swift halftime during the Super Bowl to sing a song about how you need a license sports teams to use this music. There you go. And then everyone will know.
But that's it. I mean, it's all the web of licenses. Like you might have someone perform at a halftime game in the NBA, But if they're so there's all these. It is complicated. I know, like, interestingly, TikTok are trying to do some stuff with this. They've got this thing called their commercial music library, which we talked about before, which is like, if you're a brand business, you can go to TikTok and say, right, show me all the songs that I can use. And TikTok is going to the music industry, a lot of independent artists and labels, saying, why don't you put your music in our commercial library? Brands can use it. You get played, discovered, and there's a couple of artists, Inji was one of them, who've actually broken through this. Like they broke because their music was being used by brands on TikTok from this commercial. So I think there's like an incentive for those companies like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube to actually also do this and try and figure out a solution.
Yeah.
So ideally, like, the ideal endpoint, I think, is not that companies don't use songs in their videos. I think the ideal endpoint is they can, and money is paid, and then the artists who made those songs get paid too. So I hope that's where it goes. I'm always such an optimist. I hope all these very complicated licensing wrangles can suddenly emerge into beautiful money flowing joy. But there's a few hoops to jump through before we get to there, I think.
And that's where we leave Stuart Dredge's Utopia for this week. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please do subscribe in your podcast app and give us a review and a rating, because it really does help us spread the word. Or, of course, go old school. Tell some friends about us. You can also, with some loose change, become a Price of Music fan or super fan for as little as £2 a month. Just go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thepriceofmusic, to find out more. And if you have a question which you'd like us to attempt to answer at some point in one of our listener question specials, email us your inquiries to the Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. That's the Price of Music Podcast at gmail.com. Till next time, take care, everybody. Cheerio.